Hi, I'm Nora O'Donnell. As we mark 22 years since the deadliest terror attack on American soil, we remember those lives lost, the families no longer whole, and the heroes who put their lives on the line to help others, including 2 fighter pilots here in the Washington, D.C. area. We first brought you their story 2 years ago, but it is still widely unknown, and it's one we think everyone should hear. We've included in this extended cut air traffic control audio that covers the airspace over the eastern seaboard as a reminder of the confusion as everything unfolded that Tuesday morning. That's when Mark Sassville, call sign Sass, and Heather Penny, call sign Lucky, took off after the World Trade Center was hit with one sole mission: to protect the nation's capital, no matter what it took.
American Airlines emergency line, please state your emergency.
Hey, this is Nitty at American Airlines calling. I am monitoring a call in which Flight 11, the flight attendant is advising our reps that the pilot, everyone's been stabbed.
We got hit by surprise.
We contacted air traffic control. They are going to handle this as a confirmed hijacking.
And we weren't going to be caught on the ground watching America get hit again.
Just weapons, Sergeant Powell.
Hi, Boston Center, Team U. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need someone to scramble some F16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
So, if you were in a scramble...
No, we have several situations going on here. It's escalating big time. And we need to get the military involved with this.
Well, what's going on?
Just get me somebody who has the authority to get military in the air now.
Well, thank you guys both for doing this. I think as much as we all know about 9/11 and reflecting back, your story is one that many people don't know about. Let's start 20 years ago. What were you both doing when you heard about the first strike against America? General?
It was a normal Tuesday morning. We had just come back from a big deployment out to Las Vegas where we had a lot of training to do, and we were very successful. We had a normal scheduling meeting, and in the middle of that is when things started to unfold and caught all of us by surprise. Before you know it, the phones are ringing, and we're talking to the White House JOC, we're talking to the Secret Service, trying to just really understand what's happening. And one thing led to another. Before we got too far down the road, we were just trying to get in the air as soon as we could to make sure another airplane didn't hit its target fundamentally.
Heather, describe where you were when you first heard about the World Trade Center.
I was sitting in the scheduling meeting with SAS and some of the other pilots that were part of the senior leadership in the squadron that day. So there was SAS, Dan Raisin Kane was there. It was Mark Drifter Valentine's first day.
September 11th. Yeah.
We had Phil Dog Thompson was our supervisor of flying. So we were working on how we were going to fly that week, who was available, who had check rides that month. It was just normal administration. And David Chunks Callahan, one of our enlisted troops, knocks on the door and opens up the door and says, an airplane just flew into the World Trade Center. And I remember thinking, well, how could that have happened? It was a spectacularly clear blue day. And I don't know about you, but I think most of us assumed that it was a small airplane. That it was like a small general aviation Cessna. And everyone knows those airplanes just bounce off of buildings. They don't really cause damage. So I recall a few inappropriate jokes. But it wasn't until he came back and said, a second aircraft hit the second World Trade Center, and it was on purpose. And that was when we all got up to the bar and saw the images that everyone else that morning saw. That was when we really knew that the nation was under attack.
Mm-hmm. I remember when the second plane hit, my immediate thought was, we're at war. Immediately thought that.
Another one just hit the building.
Wow.
Wow, another one just hit it hard.
Another one just hit the World Trade.
The whole building just came apart.
This is not an accident.
I think we thought the same thing, and in my mind, my instinct was we needed to react. We've got to get up into the air with whatever we have. But this is December 7th, 1941, so many years later, and we cannot let another airplane hit its target. If they are coming for here, and so, you know, not too long after that, the Pentagon is hit. We were all in a reaction mode here in the wing. It was a complete wing effort to get the airplanes ready to start to pull missiles out and to get some kind of capability up in the air.
Well, I told the FD so far, we need to get those fighters screwed over Manhattan because we don't know how many guys are out of bounds. Could be 3-2, could be more.
I think once we got past that initial actions phase, if you will, it started to sink in that we were going to have a long-standing security commitment for many years. No idea that it would take as long as it did, but.
So you were thinking, we got to get up in the air. When did the orders come down?
So we never got any official tasking. We were asked by the White House jock if there was anything that we could get up into the air. And so we were, at that time, our squadron, our wing was not part of NORAD. We were not part of that structure tasked to defend America. So when they indicated that what turned out to be Flight 93 was coming down the river, as we talked about it, that indicated to us there may be more coming. We need to do something, and so that became essentially our unofficial tasking, and we did what we needed to do.
Heather, describe what was your understanding about when the White House called and what they wanted you to do.
We knew immediately, as soon as we saw the images, that we needed to protect and defend. But as General Sasseville said, we were not an alert squadron. We didn't have any missiles, and we weren't part of the command and control chain. How could we get authority? Everyone in the squadron, everyone in the wing began immediately to take action. I remember our intelligence officer, David Nuts McNulty, making phone calls to airline reservations desks to try to find out who was still airborne, what aircraft were taking off, what airliners were due in. He was trying to build us a picture of what was going on within the airspace. When we finally got the call from the White House, our mission to protect and defend was obvious. Even though at that point in time we didn't have missiles on board, we needed to do everything we possibly could do to protect any further attack from reaching our nation's capital.
The White House, get your fighters there as soon as possible. I came from Boston?
Well, we're going to turn and burn and crank it up. All right, here we go. This is what we're going to do here.
Miles east of the White House right now.
So describe that. I mean, I just kind of like take me to that moment, you know, was it let's go, get up, the White House just called, like how was it communicated to you, get in the planes, like describe that for me, General.
So essentially it was Phil Dog Thompson was standing behind the duty desk talking to the Secret Service, and that was the demand signal was there may be more coming. So that's all we really needed. He called the wing commander came down. We ran into a quick briefing to assess the threat, figure out what we needed to do, and Lucky and I were the first ones to take off, and we just went down, grabbed our flight gear, and got in the airplanes. Lieutenant Colonel Denman, the maintenance officer at the time, was out there pulling pins, and we jumped in the airplanes and took off without wasting any time. It just happened so quickly because of the severity of the issue. We knew we didn't have time to spare.
When were you told that you could shoot down a plane if it didn't respond?
That came a little bit later. Once we were airborne, all that sorted out. The Vice President, as you know, and we all know at this point, made a declaration, and so it took a while for that to get down through the wing commander here. And so once we were airborne, we understood what the rules of engagement were, and that was really part of the concern. Is in the fog of war at the time, in the confusion, we needed to be very careful that we didn't make a bad situation worse.
But you're scrambling. to get the jets up in the air. What did you understand about the rules of engagement, Heather?
We understood what the threat was. We were looking for a rogue airliner flying low that was not communicating with air traffic control.
Gopher 06, traffic is 11 o'clock and 5 miles northbound, fast moving, type and altitude unknown.
Gopher 06, we have traffic inside 12 o'clock.
All right, you have the traffic. Do you know what kind it is? Can you see?
Looks like a 757, sir.
A 757. Can you estimate its altitude?
Looks like he's at low altitude right now, sir.
Gopher 86, thank you.
So we had a very good idea contextually of what would comprise a hostile target. As General Sasseville said, the indications were that there was an aircraft coming in from the northwest low down the Potomac River, and so that was the initial target that we were looking for. And we would have to do whatever it took to prevent it from reaching DC. After SAS took us out, sanitized the airspace far enough to make sure that there was no threat on that axis, and then brought us back to DC. I remember you working with Potomac Air Traffic Control and teaching them how to become air battle managers, because there was an incredible response of medics, of police helicopters, of military airlift. So even though when we took off, the airspace was dead calm, when we came back and SAS set up a counter-rotating combat air patrol, all sorts of aircraft and helicopters began to get airborne, and we had to sort out who was a good guy, who was a medevac, who was official government, who was just an innocent individual who had no idea what had gone on, and who potentially could be a threat. And the air traffic control, the controllers down in the Potomac, TRACON, the radar system that manages all the airspace around DC, they did a fantastic job.
I mean, General, how long do pre-flight checks usually take?
It's usually a 20-minute program, 15 to 20 minutes, nice and calm, and making sure that everything's organized where it needs to be, properly fueled, proper tire pressure, oxygen pressure, and the like.
And how much time did you have on 9/11?
I got right in the cockpit. Then that's part of the team effort that Lucky's talking about. Is it was a team effort, and the maintainers do a great job. It's a second check when we jump in, so we both trusted our maintainers. That's the special bond that pilots and crew chiefs have, and we both jumped in and took off right away.
In fact, Heather, I read you were saying pull the blocks. What you mean? You were moving. You guys were moving and pulling stuff out of the plane to get up as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. Jumping up into the jet, as General Sasseville said, I mean, normally it would take up to 20 minutes, and we didn't have GPS back then. Clearly, we didn't have 20 minutes. And I had actually never been trained on how to scramble an aircraft, how to scramble an F16. And in order to be able to do that, you had to actually, nowadays we call it hawking a jet. There are systems that you sort of preset so that we can take off and go really quickly. But I'd never been trained on any of that. The jets clearly had not already been set up for that. And so I had to kind of make up my own procedures for scrambling.
You didn't have all the instruments on.
When I jumped up in the jet, my main concern was, what's the minimum that I need to do to make this jet airworthy to fly? Checking the engine, checking the flight control, but I had no navigation system. I had no radar. None of the systems had the time to go through their normal checks. I was just hoping the in-flight line thing worked.
And your F-16s weren't armed with missiles. Why not?
Well, we never did that. We never, since we weren't part of the alert enterprise, it's actually kind of dangerous to have live missiles loaded all the time. So we had them available, but they weren't assembled we don't store them together, right? That's a huge hazard. So they weren't assembled, let alone brought forward here to the flight line, let alone loaded up on the airplanes. That happened about an hour after we took off, and so Raisin and Igor had missiles on their airplanes by the time they took off.
I mean, if you remember, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the nation wanted a peace dividend, and they wanted to really draw down the entire military. So they cut the Air Force in half. And so all of the alert units that used to ring our nation's borders to protect us from Soviet nuclear bombers had been reduced to only 5 alert units for the entire nation. And we were not one of them. That's why we didn't have armed missiles on the aircraft, and why we weren't part of NORAD, why we had such challenges getting the authorization to launch, was because of how small the Air Force had become. And the Guard suffered the same.
And post 9/11, though, now there are armed F-16s ready to go.
Absolutely. Since 9/11, we've had a 24/7, 365 air defense commitment. We call it airspace control alert now. But we are lock, stock, and barrel part of that chain of command, part of that enterprise, and it makes you wonder why we weren't set up that way before 9/11.
If you two were flying F-16s that weren't armed, how were you going to take down Flight 93?
So you'll be happy to know, and I think the American public will be happy to know, that we don't train to take down airliners. We never have. I had practiced during the Cold War how to attack large airplanes, bombers, our enemy's bombers, and so I was a little bit familiar with how that might go. But you're right, we didn't have any missiles, and we didn't have combat loads of bullets. We had training rounds. And so as we're running out to the airplane, the thought occurred to us, we do need to kind of understand how we're going to do that. And so Lucky and I had a game plan on how we might approach that. But the fundamental premise is we were going to have to hit the airplane and disable it somehow, either get the flight controls or the propulsion system or some part of the airplane that would make it alter its course and not hit its target.
A kamikaze mission.
We had no missiles. Our only choice was going to be to ram the airliner. Sir, I remember you would take the cockpit to aim at the terrorists. And I would take the tail.
And you said that?
We did, as we're running out to the airplane.
And so when he said that to you, what did you think?
Of course. It was obvious, it was so clear what needed to be done. Neither of us had any second thoughts.
We didn't have time to think of it. It was pure reaction mode, it was pure adrenaline, and thankfully we had enough training to safely get airborne, work together as a team to find the airplane, and thankfully it wasn't there. We never saw it, but we knew that there is a potential that there might be more airplanes coming. There might be a second or third wave that we needed to be ready for. And so for that small part of time, we just needed to have some kind of capability to prevent those targets from being hit.
What was your understanding? I mean, did you have the understanding that Flight 93 was headed to the White House or to the U.S. Capitol?
Okay, United 93.
Go ahead.
Is 29 minutes out of Washington, D.C. 29 minutes out of Washington, D.C. and tracking towards it. This is the one who reversed course in Ohio.
Well, we saw the Pentagon on fire. If there was another airplane, there are only certain value targets inside of the District of Columbia. They're all government related, and all high value targets that, if they had been hit, would have probably changed the course of history.
You were going to ram the cockpit, you were going to ram the tail. That's not something you survive.
No. A suicide mission is not something you survive. I mean, as the military, we don't send our service members on suicide missions. But it was clear what needed to be done that morning. And although it wasn't until much later that I made the correlation for myself that this was Flight 93. We knew that there was an airliner coming in low from the northwest. And we also believed that there were potentially up to 3 unaccounted for aircraft, based off of the work that our intelligence officer, David McNulty, had done. So we had to be ready. We knew that Dan Kane and Brandon Rasmussen were back at the squadron, and if they needed to, they could scramble just as quickly. But I remember you saying, Raisin, you and Igor, wait until you get missiles. So protecting our nation's capital from an incoming airliner, from an attack, from a terrorist, was what we needed to do. We'd already seen what they'd done in New York. We saw what they had done with the Pentagon. We flew over, we passed through the smoke. What else would there be but our nation's leadership?
The vice president had given the order to shoot down a commercial airline. Did he know that you were unarmed?
Vice President has cleared.
Vice President has cleared us to intercept tracks. Shoot them down if they do not respond first on RCC.
So the vice president gave a weapons-free order, I think was the term that was used at the time. I don't think that anybody really had a great picture of what was happening at the time. And so I want to, it's important to know that nobody asked us to do this. Nobody in the chain of command directed us to take this approach. This is something that we saw. This is a scenario that we saw, and we knew what needed to be done. It's also important to note that our unit lives here. This is our home. So not only is this the nation's capital, but we have friends, we have families here, deep roots as a Guard unit, and frankly a little bit of a personal angle on defending our own turf as well. So it was a very difficult position that we were all put in that day, and thankfully, like I said, we didn't make matters worse.
It was not an order through the chain of command. It was your call to ram the plane.
We didn't have any other choice. And we weren't going to be caught on the ground watching America get hit again. It wasn't going to happen.
No question in your mind that was the right thing to do.
Not a question.
And the only thing you could do.
We didn't have any choice, yeah, absolutely.
Describe what it was like flying over the Pentagon that was on fire.
So after we drove up the river, didn't see anything on the radar, we're looking low, turned back around and flew over the Pentagon. And one of the most vivid memories I have is looking down, seeing the fire, smelling the smoke and the fumes coming through the cockpit, and being completely nauseous. And it wasn't the smoke that was making me nauseous, it was the thought that we got hit by surprise. We were attacked, successfully attacked, and we couldn't do anything about it. That's what got to me.
What was your thought, Heather?
I recall how white and black the smoke was against the clear, clear blue sky, and how it just barely drifted because the winds were so light out of the southwest. But really what I was focused on was trying to be a good wingman and do what we needed to get done. So I remember the physical sensations. I remember the smell coming through the ECS, but I really didn't have any emotion. It was